My name is Garrett Thompson, 34, and I never thought a family funeral would expose the truth I had been avoiding for 10 years. Standing in my childhood home after burying our father, I watched as my younger brother Ryan nursed his fourth whiskey. Our relationship had always been complicated, but the death of our sister Lily a decade ago left fractures I desperately tried to repair. I should have known that grief and alcohol make a dangerous combination, especially when buried resentments finally surface. Let me know where you are watching from in the comments below, and if this story resonates with you, please subscribe to hear more stories about family, healing, and finding strength when no one stands beside you. Growing up as the eldest of 3 siblings in suburban Boston, I felt the weight of my parents' expectations from an early age. My father, Michael Thompson, was a successful civil engineer who believed in discipline, hard work, and leading by example. From the moment I could hold a pencil, he guided me toward following in his footsteps. The eldest son carries the family legacy, he would say, his hand heavy on my shoulder as we reviewed my math homework together. My mother, Catherine, was softer in her approach but no less expectant of perfection. A former concert pianist who gave up her career to raise us, she channeled her artistic ambitions through me with piano lessons and art classes I never quite excelled at. While I struggled under the pressure of being the family trailblazer, my brother Ryan seemed to exist under entirely different rules. 5 years younger than me, Ryan was the charmer of the family. With his easy smile and natural athleticism, he effortlessly won people over. Where I received stern lectures for B+ grades, Ryan would be praised for simply passing his classes. "Your brother is different," my mother would explain when I pointed out the discrepancy. "He needs more encouragement." Over time, I accepted this as truth, burying any resentment beneath layers of responsibility. Between us was Lily, just 2 years my junior, and the true light of our family. She had my father's analytical mind and my mother's artistic soul, somehow managing to excel at everything while remaining genuinely humble. When tensions rose between Ryan and me, Lily was the peacemaker, the bridge that kept our family connected. "Garrett, he looks up to you more than you know," she would whisper after mediating yet another argument between us. "And Ryan," she would turn to him, "your brother has your back, even when you can't see it." We believed her because Lily had a way of seeing the best in all of us. She understood the complex dynamics of our family better than anyone, perhaps because she occupied the perfect middle ground. While I carried the burden of being the firstborn and Ryan enjoyed the freedom of being the youngest, Lily balanced between us, somehow managing to be both responsible and carefree. Everything changed 10 years ago, on what should have been a routine drive home from a family dinner celebrating my graduation from architecture school. Lily had insisted on riding with me while our parents and Ryan took the other car. We were discussing my new job offer and her upcoming semester abroad in Spain. The rain had been falling steadily all evening, creating a slick sheen on the winding roads leading to our family home. I remember checking the rearview mirror, seeing the headlights of another car approaching too quickly. Then came the impact from behind, the horrifying sensation of hydroplaning, and the sickening crunch of metal as we hit the guardrail. The airbags deployed in a cloud of chemical dust, and when I regained consciousness minutes later, the world had irreversibly changed. Lily died at the scene. The official report cited the other driver's excessive speed and poor conditions and absolved me of blame, but that offered little consolation. In the aftermath, our family splintered in ways that would never fully heal. My parents processed their grief differently. My father retreated into work and stoicism, rarely speaking of Lily except in passing references that left sentences unfinished. My mother immersed herself in grief support groups and therapy, yet remained emotionally distant from me, as though my presence was a painful reminder of what she had lost. Ryan, however, made his feelings clear without ever stating them directly. He stopped making eye contact with me at family gatherings. He would leave rooms when I entered. When forced to interact, his responses were clipped and cold. Though he never said the words until that fateful day after the funeral, I always knew he blamed me for Lily's death. "You should have been more careful," he said once, during a rare moment when we found ourselves alone at our parents' house for a holiday dinner, about 2 years after the accident. You were always the responsible one, right? That's what everyone said. I tried countless times to bridge the gap. I attended every one of his college basketball games, sent thoughtful birthday gifts, and reached out regularly despite his minimal responses. I hoped that time would soften his resentment, that he would eventually see that I, too, carried the weight of that night. That I would have traded places with Lily in a heartbeat if I could have. Despite the emotional turbulence of those years, I somehow managed to build a successful career. Architecture became my refuge, a place where I could create order from chaos, beauty from rough materials. My firm specialized in sustainable community buildings, libraries, schools, community centers, places that brought people together. Perhaps it was my subconscious attempt to rebuild what had been broken in my own life. I met Megan, my girlfriend of 3 years, at a charity event where I was receiving an award for a low-income housing project. As a social worker, she understood trauma and family dysfunction better than most. She encouraged me to seek therapy, to process what happened rather than simply carrying it. Your family has made you the emotional container for their grief, she observed after meeting them for the first time. That's not sustainable, Garrett. Not for anyone. She was right, but breaking entrenched family patterns proved harder than designing award-winning buildings. Every attempt to discuss Lily or the accident was met with resistance. My father would change the subject, my mother would find a reason to leave the room, and Ryan would simmer with barely contained anger. So we existed in this painful limbo for nearly a decade, gathering for holidays and birthdays with forced smiles and careful conversation that never ventured beyond the superficial. We became experts at talking around the gaping hole in our family, never acknowledging the ghost that sat with us at every dinner table. Until my father's diagnosis changed everything. The call came on a Tuesday morning in early autumn. I was reviewing blueprints for a new public library when my phone lit up with my mother's name. Immediately, I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. My mother rarely called during working hours unless something was wrong. Your father has stage 4 pancreatic cancer, she said, her voice unnaturally steady. The doctor says he has maybe 3 months. The news hit like a physical blow. My father, despite his emotional distance, had always seemed indestructible, a constant, immovable force in my life. The idea of him weakened, diminished by disease, was impossible to reconcile with the man I knew. I'll come right away, I promised, already closing my laptop and signaling to my assistant. Ryan is flying in tomorrow, she added before hanging up, the implication clear. Our fractured family would need to find a way to coexist through what was coming. The next 2 months became a blur of hospital visits, consultations with oncologists, and researching experimental treatments that might buy more time. My father, ever practical, rejected most interventions after the first round of chemotherapy left him weaker than the cancer itself. Quality over quantity, Garrett, he told me during one of our rare moments alone. I've lived my life on my terms. I'll leave it the same way. While I managed medical appointments and helped my mother navigate the complicated healthcare system, Ryan focused on being the emotional support. He had a natural ease with our father that I had always lacked. They would watch sports together in comfortable silence or reminisce about fishing trips from Ryan's childhood, trips I had usually missed because of academic commitments. I tried not to feel resentful as I handled insurance paperwork in the kitchen, while laughter occasionally drifted from the living room. This was how our family had always functioned. Me managing logistics while Ryan provided the emotional connection everyone seemed to crave. As our father's condition deteriorated, the tension between Ryan and me intensified. Small disagreements about treatment options or hospice care escalated quickly into arguments about much older grievances. If you lived closer, you could do more than just swoop in with your medical binders and schedules, Ryan snapped one evening after I suggested hiring additional home health care to give our mother some rest. I've taken a leave of absence from work to be here, I countered, trying to keep my voice level. And someone needs to manage these details. Always the responsible one, he muttered, an echo of countless similar comments over the years. Make sure everyone knows how much you're sacrificing. Our mother, exhausted from the constant caregiving, lacked the energy to mediate as Lily once had. Instead, she would simply leave the room when conflicts arose, her silence becoming another weight I carried. As the weeks passed and our father weakened, relatives began arriving from across the country. Aunts, uncles, and cousins filled the house with casseroles and well-intentioned advice. Most had not seen the full extent of our family's dysfunction in the years since Lily's death, and many seemed surprised by the palpable tension between Ryan and me. My father's sister, Aunt Patricia, cornered me in the kitchen one evening while I was washing dishes. "Your brother seems very angry," she observed, handing me a plate to dry. "Is there something going on beyond your dad's illness?" I considered deflecting but found myself too tired for pretense. "It's been this way since Lily died. He blames me, I think." She frowned, placing a hand on my arm. "The accident wasn't your fault, Garrett. Everyone knows that." "Not everyone," I replied, turning back to the sink. The day before our father passed, he asked to speak with me alone. Ryan had gone to pick up our uncle from the airport, and my mother was napping after a sleepless night of caregiving. My father, once robust and commanding, had been reduced to a skeletal figure in the hospital bed we'd set up in the dining room. His voice, however, remained strong as he gestured for me to sit beside him. "You've done well, handling everything," he said, his eyes clearer than they had been in days. "Just doing what needs to be done," I replied, uncomfortable with praise I rarely received from him. He nodded, then surprised me by reaching for my hand. "After Lily died, I couldn't. I should have been there more. For all of you." My throat tightened. This was the closest we had come to discussing Lily's death in years. "I know you did your best, Dad." "Not always," he said, his grip tightening slightly. "With you especially. I expected too much and said too little." I wanted to ask more, to finally have the conversation we'd avoided for a decade, but his eyes were already drifting closed, the brief moment of clarity passing as quickly as it had come. By the time Ryan returned with our uncle, my father had slipped back into a morphine-induced sleep. He passed away peacefully the next morning with all of us by his side. The funeral arrangements fell to me naturally. I worked with the funeral director on details while Ryan supported our mother through her initial shock and grief. By the time the service was scheduled, our house was filled with relatives and family friends, many staying in nearby hotels but gathering daily in our living room and kitchen. Megan flew in 2 days before the funeral, her presence a buoy I clung to amid the emotional currents threatening to pull me under. She noticed immediately what I had been too preoccupied to fully register: how family members subtly gravitated toward Ryan and my mother, while I remained the outsider managing practical matters. "Have you had any time to grieve?" she asked quietly as we lay in my childhood bedroom the night before the funeral. "There hasn't been time," I answered honestly. "Maybe after everyone leaves." She turned to face me in the darkness. "Garrett, I'm worried about tomorrow. There's so much unresolved tension here, and funerals have a way of bringing everything to the surface." "It'll be fine," I assured her, with more confidence than I felt. "Everyone will be on their best behavior for Dad." But as I stared at the ceiling long after Megan had fallen asleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was shifting in our family dynamics. My father's brief moment of connection had cracked open a door I had long believed permanently closed. What might emerge from that opening, I wasn't prepared to face. The day of my father's funeral dawned with an appropriately somber gray sky. I woke early after a restless night, my body tense with the weight of the day ahead. Beside me, Megan slept soundly, her presence the only truly comforting thing in my childhood home that now felt more foreign than familiar. Downstairs, I found my mother already dressed in black, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of untouched tea. She looked smaller somehow, diminished not just by grief but by the fundamental shift in her identity, no longer a wife after 42 years of marriage. "I laid out your father's blue tie on your dresser," she said without looking up. "He would have wanted you to have it." The simple gesture nearly undid me. It was the first personal item of my father's she had offered, and the significance wasn't lost on me. I thanked her quietly, not trusting my voice with more words. The funeral service was scheduled for 11 at the Presbyterian church my parents had attended sporadically over the years. By 10, relatives began gathering at the house, arriving in somber groups that filled the living room with murmured conversations and the occasional quiet laugh as someone shared a memory of my father. Ryan appeared last, immaculately dressed in a suit I hadn't seen before. He moved immediately to our mother's side, where he remained like a sentry, accepting condolences on her behalf and graciously thanking people for coming. I busied myself coordinating with the funeral director by phone, arranging the transportation details, and ensuring the memorial program I had designed was properly printed. "Always working, even today," commented my cousin Mark as he passed me in the hallway. "Your brother seems pretty broken up. How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," I replied automatically. "Just making sure everything goes smoothly." The service itself was a blur of hymns, Bible readings, and the minister's generic platitudes about a man he had barely known. When the time came for the eulogy, I approached the pulpit with the carefully written speech I had prepared over the previous sleepless nights. Looking out at the packed church, I saw the expected faces, colleagues from my father's engineering firm, neighbors, friends from his golf club. My mother sat in the front row, flanked by Ryan on one side and my Aunt Patricia on the other. Megan offered an encouraging smile from her seat in the second row. "My father believed in building things that last," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "Bridges, buildings, systems that withstand time and elements. But his greatest creation was less visible, the foundation of integrity and responsibility he built within his family." As I continued, sharing carefully selected memories and my father's philosophy on life and work, I noticed Ryan's expression harden. By the time I concluded, his jaw was visibly clenched, his arm wrapped protectively around our mother's shoulders. When it was Ryan's turn to speak, his approach was markedly different. Where my eulogy had been measured and thoughtful, his was raw emotion. He spoke of fishing trips and basketball games, of the father who showed up to every important moment in his life. "Dad wasn't perfect," Ryan said, his voice breaking slightly. "But he loved us in the best way he knew how. After we lost Lily, he tried to hold us together when everything was falling apart." The mention of Lily sent a ripple through the congregation. It was the first time her name had been spoken aloud during the service, and the effect was palpable. I saw my mother's shoulders begin to shake as silent tears streamed down her face. After the burial service at the cemetery, where I stood slightly apart from my mother and Ryan as they accepted the folded flag, we returned to the house for the reception. The dining room table that had recently held my father's hospital bed was now covered with casseroles, sandwich platters, and desserts brought by well-meaning friends and neighbors. As afternoon stretched into evening, the house remained full of people. I moved between groups, accepting condolences and making sure glasses were filled and plates cleared. Megan stayed close, her hand occasionally finding mine in silent support as we navigated the social obligations of grief. The turning point came around 8 o'clock, when only family and closest friends remained. Someone, I later learned it was my father's old college roommate, had brought several bottles of expensive whiskey. To toast Michael properly. What began as dignified sips and commemorative glasses gradually evolved into more generous pours as the night wore on. I noticed Ryan's increasing consumption with growing concern. His voice grew louder, his gestures more animated as he regaled a group of cousins with stories of our father. Megan noticed too, squeezing my hand in warning when Ryan stumbled slightly while reaching for the bottle. "Maybe we should start saying goodnight to people," I suggested quietly to my mother, who sat in my father's armchair looking exhausted. "Let them stay," she replied, her eyes on Ryan. "It's good to hear him laughing." By 10 o'clock, the atmosphere had shifted noticeably. The respectful murmurs of the afternoon had given way to louder conversations, occasional inappropriate laughter, and the looser tongues that come with alcohol. My Uncle Robert was in the middle of a questionable story about my father's bachelor party when I decided to begin quietly encouraging people to head home. "Always the responsible one," Ryan commented loudly as I walked an elderly neighbor to the door. Can't even let people properly mourn Dad without managing everything. I chose to ignore the comment, continuing to thank people for coming and helping them locate coats and purses. But Ryan wasn't finished. That was always Garrett's thing, wasn't it, Mom? He continued, refilling his glass. Control everything, be perfect, make sure everyone knows he's in charge. Ryan, my mother said softly, a weak attempt at intervention. What? It's true. Dad might have been hard on him, but Garrett gave it right back with his constant perfection. The last word came out like an accusation. The remaining guests grew quiet, the uncomfortable tension suddenly the only thing filling the room. Megan appeared at my side, her hand resting protectively on my back. I think it's time we called it a night, she suggested, her social worker voice calm but authoritative. It's been a long, emotional day for everyone. Yes, listen to Garrett's girlfriend, Ryan said with a bitter laugh. Always rescuing him when things get uncomfortable. That's enough, I finally said, my patience exhausted. You're drunk, and you're upsetting Mom. It was the wrong thing to say. Ryan's face darkened as he set his glass down with deliberate care. I'm upsetting Mom? That's rich coming from you. The room had gone completely silent now, the remaining relatives and friends frozen in place like actors waiting for their cue in a particularly uncomfortable play. My Aunt Patricia made a half-hearted attempt to change the subject, commenting on the lovely flower arrangements at the church, but her words evaporated in the charged air between Ryan and me. What exactly is that supposed to mean? I asked, though part of me already knew where this was heading. We had been circling this confrontation for 10 years. Ryan laughed, a hollow sound entirely devoid of humor. You know exactly what it means. You've always been so careful, so controlled, except when it actually mattered. My mother stood up shakily. Please, not today. Your father would. Dad would want the truth for once. Ryan interrupted, his words slightly slurred but his eyes focused with laser precision on me. We've spent 10 years tiptoeing around it, and I'm done. Megan's hand tightened on my back, a silent warning I chose to ignore. If you have something to say to me, Ryan, just say it. He took 2 steps toward me, close enough that I could smell the whiskey on his breath. Fine. You want me to say it? You killed her. You were driving too fast in the rain, showing off your new car, and you killed our sister. The accusation hung in the air like a physical thing. I heard someone, perhaps my cousin's wife, gasp softly. That's not what happened, I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. There was another driver. They hit us from behind. It was in the police report. Convenient, Ryan spat. Always an excuse, always someone else to blame. But we all know the truth. You were the eldest, the responsible one, the one who was supposed to protect her. And you failed. That's not fair, Megan interjected, her professional composure cracking. The accident wasn't Garrett's fault. He was cleared of any wrongdoing. Ryan turned his glare to her. Stay out of this. You weren't there. You didn't see what it did to this family. I lost her too, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. She was my sister too, Ryan. And it should have been you who died, not Lily. The words exploded from him with such force that everyone in the room seemed to physically recoil. The moment they left his mouth, I saw a flash of shock cross his own face, as though he couldn't believe he had finally said aloud what had been festering inside him for a decade. I felt as though all the air had been sucked from the room. My vision narrowed until all I could see was Ryan's face, contorted with a mixture of rage and grief. Somewhere distant, I heard Megan say my name, felt her hand on my arm, but I couldn't respond. What broke through the roaring in my ears wasn't Ryan's words, devastating as they were. It was the silence that followed them. I turned slowly, looking at each face in the room. My Uncle Robert, staring at his shoes, my cousins, exchanging uncomfortable glances, my Aunt Patricia, her hand covering her mouth, and finally, my mother. She sat perfectly still, her eyes fixed on her lap, not looking at either of her sons. not defending me, not contradicting the horrible statement that hung in the air between us. Her silence was confirmation. It should have been you, not Lily. Mom? The word escaped me as a question, a plea for her to say something, anything, to counter what Ryan had said. She looked up finally, her eyes red-rimmed and tired. Ryan, that's enough. You're drunk. Not. That's not true. Not. We would never wish that. Just. That's enough. As though the problem was merely that he had said it aloud, not that he felt it at all. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. This was what they all thought. What they had always thought. The reason for the distance, the strained holidays, the careful conversations that never went beyond the surface. They wished I had died instead of Lily. I don't remember deciding to leave. One moment I was standing in my parents' living room, surrounded by family who suddenly felt like strangers, and the next I was grabbing my coat from the hook by the door. Garrett, wait! Megan called, hurrying after me. I need some air, I managed to say, though air felt like the least of what I needed. Outside, the night was cold and clear, the stars painfully bright above me. I made it to my rental car before my legs threatened to give out, leaning against the driver's door and drawing in ragged breaths that did nothing to ease the tightness in my chest. Megan caught up to me, her face pale with concern in the moonlight. Don't drive. Not like this. I can't stay here. I know, she said softly. Let me drive. Please. I surrendered the keys without argument, sliding into the passenger seat and leaning my head back against the headrest as she started the engine. We drove in silence, neither of us knowing where to go in the town I had left behind years ago. Eventually, she pulled into the parking lot of a chain hotel near the highway. We'll get a room, she decided. Just for tonight. Tomorrow we can figure things out. I nodded numbly, remaining in the car while she went inside to check us in. Through the windshield, I watched her at the reception desk, her back straight and shoulders squared as though physically carrying the weight of what had just happened. It wasn't until we were in the anonymous hotel room, with its bland artwork and stiff bedspread, that the full impact hit me. I sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing my funeral suit, and felt something inside me crack open. They all think it, I said, my voice barely audible. Not just Ryan. All of them. They wish it had been me. Megan knelt in front of me, taking my hands in hers. You don't know that. Ryan was drunk and grieving. People say terrible things they don't mean in those conditions. No. I shook my head slowly. You didn't see their faces. No one disagreed. No one defended me. Not even my mother. As the words left my mouth, the dam broke. For the first time since the accident that took Lily's life, I sobbed openly, great heaving cries that seemed to come from some long-buried place inside me. Megan held me through it, her arms around my shoulders, saying nothing because there was nothing to say that could make this better. Hours later, lying in the dark hotel room with Megan sleeping fitfully beside me, I replayed the accident in my mind for the 1000th time. The rain on the windshield. Lily laughing at something I'd said. The sudden impact from behind. The sickening sensation of the car hydroplaning across the wet road. The truth was, I had asked myself the same question countless times over the years. Why her and not me? What twist of physics had spared the driver and taken the passenger? If I could have changed places with her, I would have done it in a heartbeat. But hearing that my family, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, had been thinking the same thing for 10 years changed everything. The carefully constructed reality I had been living in, where we were simply a family struggling with grief, had been a fiction. The truth was far uglier. As dawn broke, casting gray light through the cheap hotel curtains, I made a decision. I couldn't undo the past. I couldn't bring Lily back. But I could stop carrying the weight of blame that was never rightfully mine to bear. The next morning, I called my office and extended my leave of absence by another week. Megan reluctantly returned to Boston as scheduled, her patience and commitments making it impossible for her to stay, though she offered multiple times. Are you sure you'll be okay? she asked as we stood in the airport drop-off lane, her concern evident in the worried crease between her eyebrows. I need to do this, I assured her, trying to project a confidence I didn't entirely feel. I need time to process everything without anyone else's input. She nodded, understanding as always. Call me. Anytime, day or night. Promise? I promised, watching until she disappeared through the security checkpoint before returning to my rental car. Instead of driving back to my mother's house, I checked into a different hotel, one farther from town where I was unlikely to run into any relatives who might still be around after the funeral. For the next 3 days, I barely left my room except to pick up takeout food that I had little appetite for. I turned off my phone after sending Megan a brief message letting her know where I was staying, unable to face the missed calls and texts that had accumulated, some from concerned relatives, several from my mother, and dozens from Ryan, whose tone had shifted from belligerent to apologetic once he had sobered up. In that anonymous hotel room, with its hum of air conditioning and distant sounds of other guests in the hallway, I allowed myself to truly examine the past decade of my life. Without the constant effort of maintaining family peace, without the burden of arranging my life around managing everyone else's emotions, what was left of me? On the second night, I dug out my laptop and did something I had avoided for years. I searched for news articles about the accident. The local paper had covered it extensively, given that the Thompson family was well known in the community. I forced myself to read every account, studying the photos of the crumpled car and the clinical description of the crash reconstruction. Vehicle 1 Thompson was struck from behind by Vehicle 2 Mercer, traveling at approximately 65 miles per hour in a 45 miles per hour zone. Impact caused Vehicle 1 to hydroplane across the centerline and strike the guardrail. Passenger Lily Thompson, 23, sustained fatal injuries. Driver Garrett Thompson, 24, suffered minor injuries. Driver of Vehicle 2, James Mercer, 37, was found to have a blood alcohol content of 0.14, well above the legal limit. The facts were there in black and white. It hadn't been my fault. The police investigation, the insurance report, the witness statements, all confirmed what I had always known but somehow been made to question. I had been driving responsibly. The accident was caused by a drunk driver who served 3 years in prison for vehicular homicide. Why, then, had I allowed my family's implicit blame to seep into my consciousness? Why had I spent a decade trying to earn forgiveness for something that wasn't my doing? On the third day, I drove to the cemetery. The fresh mound of earth at my father's grave was covered with flowers from the funeral, their colors already beginning to fade in the autumn air. Beside it was an older headstone, the marble smooth and well-maintained, Lily and Thompson, beloved daughter and sister, forever in our hearts. I sat on the damp grass between the graves, unconcerned about my jeans or the light drizzle that had begun to fall. "I miss you, Lil," I said aloud, running my fingers over the engraved letters of her name. "Every day. But I can't keep carrying this anymore." For hours I sat there, sometimes talking to Lily as though she could hear me, sometimes sitting in silence as the rain fell steadily harder. I recalled memories of our childhood, moments of connection that had nothing to do with the accident or its aftermath. Lily teaching me to dance before my high school prom. The two of us sneaking out to see a meteor shower when we should have been asleep. Her proud face at my college graduation, just days before the crash. By the time I stood to leave, my clothes were soaked through and my fingers numb with cold, but my mind felt clearer than it had in years. The accident had been just that, an accident. Tragic, devastating, and unfair, but not my fault. Lily wouldn't have blamed me. And it was time I stopped allowing others to do so. Back at the hotel, I finally turned on my phone. Among the missed calls and messages was a voicemail from an unexpected source, Dr. Harris, the therapist I had briefly seen after the accident before discontinuing treatment when it became too painful. "Garrett, this is Dr. Harris. Your girlfriend Megan contacted me. I understand you're going through a difficult time. My door is always open if you'd like to talk. Sometimes old wounds need fresh attention to properly heal." I sat on the edge of the bed, considering the offer. My initial instinct was to delete the message and handle things on my own, as I always had. But where had that approach gotten me? A decade of carrying invisible wounds while trying to be the peacemaker in a family that secretly resented my survival. The next morning, I called Dr. Harris and scheduled an appointment for later that day. His office was the same as I remembered: warm lighting, comfortable chairs, and walls lined with books. He had aged some in the intervening years, his beard now more gray than brown, but his eyes were as keenly observant as ever. "It's been a long time," he said, gesturing for me to take a seat. "Megan mentioned there was a confrontation after your father's funeral." I nodded, then found myself spilling the entire story, not just Ryan's drunken accusation, but the years of subtle blame, the emotional distance, and the devastating silence that followed his words. "It sounds like you've been carrying survivor's guilt compounded by family projection. Dr. Harris observed when I finally ran out of words. Your family found it easier to direct their grief and anger at you than to accept the randomness of tragedy. But why? I asked, the question that had been haunting me for days. Why me and not the actual drunk driver who caused the accident? Because you were there. You were accessible. You were willing to accept the blame. He leaned forward slightly. Garrett, have you considered that your role as the responsible eldest child made you the perfect repository for their misplaced anger? You were conditioned to carry burdens, to fix problems, to maintain family harmony at your own expense. His words hit with the force of revelation. I had been playing a role my entire life, the reliable one, the fixer, the emotional container for everyone else's feelings. And in the aftermath of Lily's death, that role had expanded to include carrying the family's collective grief and guilt. So what do I do now? I asked, feeling both liberated and terrified by this understanding. That depends, Dr. Harris replied carefully. What do you want to do? The question was so simple, yet I realized no one had asked me that in years, perhaps ever. What did I want? Not what would maintain family peace or fulfill others' expectations, but what would allow me to heal and live authentically. The answer came with surprising clarity. I want to stop being the family scapegoat. I want to set boundaries. And I want them to hear the truth, even if they're not ready to accept it. Dr. Harris nodded thoughtfully. Those are healthy goals. But I want to caution you, people who have invested heavily in a particular family narrative rarely welcome challenges to it. Are you prepared for potential resistance or rejection? Was I? The thought of further estrangement from my remaining family was painful. But continuing as we had been, with unspoken resentment poisoning every interaction, was no longer tenable. I have to try, I said finally. For Lily's sake as much as my own. She would hate what we've become. As I left Dr. Harris's office with a follow-up appointment scheduled, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, a sense of agency in my own life story. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but for the first time since that rainy night 10 years ago, I could see one that didn't involve carrying the weight of misplaced blame. That evening, I called Megan and thanked her for contacting Dr. Harris. Then I did something harder. I called my mother and told her I would be coming by the house the next day to talk. Not to make peace or paper over what had happened, but to finally bring the decade of silent blame into the open. Is Ryan still there? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. There was a brief hesitation before she answered. Yes. He's extended his stay. He's concerned about you. Good, I replied. I need to talk to both of you. As I hung up, I realized my hands were steady. Whatever happened tomorrow, I would no longer be carrying the burden alone. It was time for truth, however uncomfortable it might be. I arrived at my mother's house at exactly 10 the next morning, the time we had agreed upon. The driveway was empty except for Ryan's rental car, suggesting that the extended family had finally departed. In some ways, that made what I needed to do both easier and harder. No witnesses, but also no buffer for the raw emotions that would inevitably surface. My mother answered the door looking smaller than I remembered, the black dress from the funeral replaced by a faded cardigan and slacks that hung loosely on her frame. The house behind her was unnaturally quiet without the constant beeping of medical equipment and the hushed conversations of hospice nurses that had filled it during my father's final weeks. "Garrett," she said, relief evident in her voice. "We were worried when you disappeared." "I needed some time," I replied simply, stepping past her into the foyer. Ryan was waiting in the living room, perched awkwardly on the edge of the sofa as though prepared to stand at any moment. His face showed the aftermath of heavy drinking, puffy eyes, pallid complexion, the slight tremor in his hands as he set down his coffee mug. "Hey," he said, a weak attempt at normalcy. "Look, about what happened." I held up a hand, cutting him off. "I didn't come here for an apology. I came to talk. Really talk, for the first time in 10 years. My mother hovered uncertainly before taking a seat in my father's armchair, her fingers nervously smoothing the worn fabric of the armrests. I remained standing, needing the physical advantage as I gathered my thoughts. "I've spent the last few days thinking about our family," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "About Lily, about the accident, and about how we've all been living in the aftermath. And I've realized something important. I've been enabling a lie." Ryan frowned, opening his mouth to interject, but I continued before he could speak. "The lie is that I was somehow responsible for Lily's death. That if I had done something differently, she would still be here. It's a lie I've allowed to exist because it seemed easier than confronting the painful truth that her death was random, senseless, and not anyone's fault except the drunk driver who hit us." "We never said it was your fault," my mother protested weakly. "You didn't have to say it," I replied, meeting her eyes directly. "It was in every interaction, every holiday, every conversation we avoided. It was in the way you both pulled away from me, in the way Dad could barely look at me for years. And it was definitely in the silence after Ryan said he wished I had died instead." Ryan flinched visibly. "I was drunk. I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," I interrupted, turning to face him fully. "You might regret saying it aloud, but you meant it. And the worst part? Part of me believed I deserved it. I've spent 10 years trying to atone for surviving." The room fell silent except for the ticking of the mantel clock, my father's prized possession, still dutifully marking time as though nothing had changed. "I saw Dr. Harris yesterday," I continued after a moment. "The therapist I briefly saw after the accident. He helped me understand something important: grief needs somewhere to go. And I was the perfect target for yours because I was already conditioned to be the responsible one, the one who fixes things, the one who carries the burden." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "Garrett, that's not fair. We were all grieving." "Yes, we were," I agreed. "But my grief didn't count, did it? Because I was the one who walked away from the accident. I was the one still here while Lily wasn't. So I became the repository for everyone's pain, including my own." Ryan stood abruptly, pacing to the window and back. "What do you want from us? An apology?" "Fine, I'm sorry I said what I said. I was drunk and angry and missing Dad and Lily, and I don't want an apology," I cut in. "I want acknowledgement. I want us to finally be honest about what's been happening in this family for the past decade. I want you both to recognize that I lost her too, that I'd been grieving too, all while carrying the weight of your unspoken blame." My mother rose slowly from the armchair, her face pale but composed. For a moment I thought she might leave the room as she had so many times when conversations became too emotional. Instead, she surprised me by crossing to the bookshelf and removing a photo album I hadn't seen in years. "Sit down, both of you," she said quietly, her tone leaving no room for argument. Ryan and I exchanged a glance before complying, taking seats on opposite ends of the sofa. My mother placed the album on the coffee table between us and opened it to reveal photos of the three of us as children. Lily in the middle, her arms around both her brothers, all of us grinning with gap-toothed smiles at some long-forgotten beach vacation. "I look at these every day," she said, her finger gently tracing the outline of Lily's face. "Every single day for 10 years. And I ask myself the same question: why her? Why, my beautiful girl with her whole life ahead of her. She turned the page to more recent photos. My architecture school graduation, the three of us dressed up and smiling tensely just days before the accident. When we lost her, something broke in me. My mother continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't bear it, couldn't process it. And yes, Garrett, it was easier to distance myself from you because every time I looked at you, I saw her absence beside you. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. But it was the only way I knew how to survive. Her honesty, however painful, felt like the first real breath of air after years of drowning. Thank you for saying that, I said softly. Ryan remained silent, staring at the photos with an unreadable expression. Finally, he spoke, his voice rough with emotion. I was supposed to be in your car that night. The statement hung in the air between us, unexpected and heavy with implication. What? I asked, unsure I had heard correctly. The seating arrangements. I was supposed to ride with you, but I switched with Lily at the last minute because I wanted to ask Dad about using his golf clubs the next day. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine for the first time since I had arrived. She died in the seat that should have been mine. So when I said what I said, it wasn't really about you at all. It was about me. The revelation struck me with physical force. All these years, while I had been carrying the burden of survival guilt, Ryan had been harboring his own version of the same pain. The guilt of the empty seat, the last-minute decision that had inadvertently placed Lily in harm's way. Ryan, I began, but found I had no words to follow his name. I couldn't face it, he continued, the words coming faster now as though a dam had broken. Couldn't admit even to myself that my stupid request to switch seats might have cost her life. So I focused on you instead, your driving, your new car, anything to keep from looking at my own role. My mother reached out, placing one hand on Ryan's knee and the other on mine. We've all been carrying such terrible burdens alone, she said, tears flowing freely now. Lily would be heartbroken to see what we've become. The mention of what Lily would think broke something open in all of us. For the next hour, we talked more honestly than we had in a decade, about our individual grief journeys, about the ways we had failed each other, about the family dynamics that had made it so difficult to heal together rather than apart. Ryan admitted that his resentment toward me had roots that predated the accident, jealousy of my closer relationship with our father, frustration at always being compared to my achievements, anger at the expectations I had seemingly set for him to follow. You were the golden child, he said, without the bitterness that would have colored such a statement days earlier. Dad's pride and joy. The architect following in the engineer's footsteps. I never felt like I could measure up. That wasn't how it felt from my side, I countered, sharing my own perspective on our childhood, the pressure of being first, the weight of expectations, the way Ryan seemed to enjoy freedoms I had never been granted. I envied how easily everything came to you, sports, friends, Dad's affection. My mother listened to our exchanges with growing comprehension, occasionally offering her own insights or acknowledging the ways her parenting had perhaps reinforced these dynamics unintentionally. I always thought you two would work it out eventually, she admitted. Like siblings do. I never realized how deep these feelings went, or how Lily's death would freeze everything in place instead of bringing you closer. As the conversation continued, moving from past hurts to possible paths forward, I felt something shift within the room, not a complete healing, which would take far more than one honest conversation, but the beginning of one. The first fragile threads of a new understanding being woven between us. I don't expect us to suddenly become a perfect family, I said as the afternoon light began to fade. But I can't go back to how things were, the silence, the unspoken blame, the distance. I need us to at least try for something healthier. Ryan nodded slowly. I'd like that too. I'm sorry it took Dad's death and me being a drunk asshole to get us here. Language, our mother admonished automatically, then gave a watery laugh at the absurdity of focusing on that after everything else that had been said. As I prepared to leave, promising to return for dinner the following night, Ryan walked me to the door. In the privacy of the foyer, away from our mother's ears, he spoke quietly. I never actually wished it was you instead of her. You know that, right? It was easier to be angry at you than to face my own guilt. I studied my brother's face, so similar to my own in many ways, yet marked by different experiences, different pain. I know. And for what it's worth, it wasn't your fault either. The seat switch, I mean. The only person responsible was the driver who hit us. Ryan nodded, blinking rapidly against tears. Then, with an awkwardness born of years of emotional distance, he stepped forward and embraced me briefly. See you tomorrow? Yeah, I replied, surprised at the lump in my throat. Tomorrow. As I drove back to my hotel, I felt lighter than I had in years, not completely unburdened, but no longer carrying the weight alone. The road to real healing would be long and undoubtedly difficult, but for the first time in a decade, it felt possible. 6 months after my father's funeral and the confrontation that followed, I stood at the window of my Boston apartment, watching spring rain transform the city streets into reflective mirrors. Behind me, Megan moved about the kitchen, preparing dinner for our small gathering that evening. The apartment smelled of garlic and rosemary, comfortable and homey in a way my life had not felt for years. What time did you tell them to arrive? She called, checking something in the oven. 7. I replied, turning from the window. Mom texted that they're already in the city, just checking into their hotel. The fact that my mother and Ryan were visiting together, staying in Boston for the weekend expressly to spend time with us, still felt like a small miracle. The months following our confrontation had not been easy. Old habits of communication die hard, and we had all stumbled more than once as we attempted to forge a new kind of relationship. There had been tense phone calls, misunderstandings, and moments when it seemed easier to retreat to our respective corners rather than continue the difficult work of rebuilding. But unlike before, we kept trying. Weekly video calls became our ritual, sometimes awkward but increasingly genuine as we practiced being honest with each other. My sessions with Dr. Harris continued, providing a space where I could process the ongoing changes in my family dynamics without falling back into the role of emotional caretaker. Through therapy, I began to understand how deeply the family patterns had affected my other relationships as well, my tendency to take responsibility for others' feelings, my difficulty expressing needs, my fear of conflict. You're not responsible for managing everyone's emotions, Dr. Harris reminded me during a particularly difficult session after a disagreement with Ryan had reopened old wounds. Their feelings are their own, just as yours are yours. It was a simple concept that nevertheless required daily practice to internalize. Slowly, I was learning to distinguish between empathy and emotional caretaking, between healthy compromise and self-sacrifice. Ryan, to his credit, had begun his own healing journey. In one of our more vulnerable conversations, he revealed that he had started attending therapy shortly after returning home from our father's funeral. I couldn't ignore what happened, he explained over the phone, his voice carrying the humility that comes with difficult self-reflection. What I said to you, what it revealed about how I've been dealing, or not dealing, with Lily's death all these years. I needed help. My mother's path was perhaps the most challenging. After 4 decades of marriage, she was not only grieving my father but also learning to navigate the world as an individual for the first time in her adult life. The process of examining her role in our family dynamics came secondary to the more immediate needs of rebuilding her identity. Yet even she was making efforts, in her own way. She had joined a grief support group specifically for widows and widowers, finding comfort in shared experiences. During one of our video calls, she surprised me by acknowledging something I had never expected to hear. I favored Ryan after we lost Lily, she said, her face serious on my laptop screen. Not because I loved him more, but because he needed me more overtly. You were always so self-sufficient, Garrett. I told myself you were fine on your own. The admission brought tears to my eyes. I wasn't, though, I replied softly. I just didn't know how to ask for help. I know that now, she said. And I'm trying to do better. These small steps toward authentic connection, however imperfect, had brought us to this evening, My mother and brother visiting Boston together for the first time since I had moved here after college. It would be their first time meeting Dr. Harris, whom I had invited to dinner along with two of my closest friends, creating a careful blend of family and chosen family. The doorbell rang precisely at 7. Taking a deep breath, I went to welcome my family, not as the designated emotional container or the scapegoat for collective grief, but simply as Garrett, with all the complexity and worth that entailed. Dinner was not without its awkward moments. My mother, still uncomfortable with open displays of emotion, retreated briefly to the bathroom when the conversation turned to memories of Lily. Ryan, noticing my friend's protective glances toward me, became temporarily defensive until Dr. Harris skillfully redirected the conversation. I caught myself more than once falling into old patterns of smoothing tensions before consciously stepping back, allowing uncomfortable moments to exist without immediately trying to fix them. Yet for all its imperfections, the evening held a genuineness that our family interactions had lacked for years. We laughed together over childhood stories. We acknowledged difficult memories without being consumed by them. We existed in the same space not as people bound only by tragedy, but as individuals connected by shared history and cautious hope for the future. After everyone had left, Megan and I stood side by side at the sink, washing dishes in comfortable silence. "That went well," she observed, handing me a plate to dry. "Better than you expected, I think." I nodded, considering the evening. "It's strange. For so long, I thought healing meant going back to how things were before the accident, before we lost Lily. But that's not possible. We're different people now." "That's not necessarily a bad thing," Megan replied gently. "Healing isn't about erasing what happened. It's about integrating it into who you are now." Her words echoed what Dr. Harris had been telling me for months, but something about hearing them in this moment, after an evening that represented so much progress, made them resonate more deeply. The next morning, I took my mother and Ryan to the small memorial garden I had helped design at a local community center. It was a peaceful space with flowering trees and a simple stone bench inscribed with words from Lily's favorite poet. I had never told my family about it, keeping this personal tribute separate from the strained grief we shared. "It's beautiful," my mother whispered, touching the bench's inscription with trembling fingers. "She would have loved this." Ryan circled the small garden slowly, taking in the thoughtful details. The specific flowers Lily had always admired, the wind chimes similar to those that had hung on our childhood porch. "Why didn't you tell us about this place?" he asked finally. I considered the question carefully before answering. "I think I needed something that was just mine. A way to remember her that wasn't tangled up in everything else." He nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. "I get that. We all had to find our own ways forward." The three of us sat on the bench together, shoulders touching lightly, sharing the space and the silence in a way that would have been impossible 6 months earlier. No magical healing had erased the decade of pain between us, but something new was growing in its place, a more honest relationship built on the understanding that we had all been doing the best we could with the tools we had. Later that day, as I hugged them goodbye outside their hotel, my mother held on a moment longer than usual. "I'm proud of you," she said quietly. "Not just for your success or your achievements, but for who you are. For your strength in bringing us back together when it would have been easier to walk away." The words were simple but profound in their impact. The maternal validation I had unconsciously sought for years, offered freely at last. As their taxi pulled away, I stood on the sidewalk watching until it disappeared around a corner. The journey of healing our family had only just begun, with many difficult conversations and revelations likely still ahead. Yet for the first time since that rainy night a decade ago, the future held more promise than pain. Standing there in the spring sunshine, I thought of Lily, not as the ghost that had haunted our family interactions for years, but as the vibrant, loving person she had been. I could almost hear her voice, feel her hand on my shoulder, as she had so often done when mediating between Ryan and me. "Good job, big brother," she would have said. "Keep going." And I would, one day at a time, carrying her memory not as a burden of guilt but as a light guiding me toward the kind of life she would have wanted for all of us, authentic, compassionate, and free from the chains of unspoken blame. What moment in this story resonated with you the most? Have you ever had to stand up for yourself when no one else would? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story touched you, please like and subscribe for more stories about family healing and finding strength in difficult times. Remember, sometimes the most important person to defend is yourself. Thank you for listening, and I wish you courage on your own journey of healing and growth.